1939 begins the Golden Age of comic books, month number 8, which ties into the same month release of Action Comics number 8 and the first 8th appearance of Superman in comic books. 1939 began big time. 23 titles released that month with a cover date of January 1939, tying the record so far set. And a lot of big things were happening. Centaur Publications was still the company putting out the most titles, and this month, starting the new year, they relaunched 5 of their titles with new volumes and new number 1s. And you'll see those on the chart. A few copies of each graded, but generally speaking fairly rare, and actually fairly affordable, all under $200 in low grade. Bronco Bill got his unofficial number 1 issue in single series Reunited Features. A few copies of that graded, but still a fairly cheap price tag. Little Giant Detective Funnies number 4 was the final issue from this small-sized comic from Centaur Publications. Jumbo Comics continued its run as being one of the most important new comics put out, and the first title from publisher Fiction House. And you can see from the Overstreet price guide how the value and historical importance has definitely been set on this book, featuring early work of Will Eisner, Jack Kirby, and many others. But the biggest comic of the month is Action Comics number 8. The 8th appearance of Superman, though Superman does not appear on the cover. This is by far the most common book on the CGC census, with 27 copies being graded in all conditions, but no high-grade copies ever being graded. It also is by far the most valuable comic of the month, worth over $2,000 in low grade and $43,000 in near mint 9.2 in the Overstreet Price Guide Annual. Looking at other trends and things that we make note of this month, Western was publishing a few titles still, and they're not highly collected, still fairly cheap prices in the price guide. But it's Ace Comics number 22, which is actually the cheapest comic of the month from David McKay. Only $36 to buy a copy of this book, and yet it is so scarce, there's not a single copy graded on the CGC in any condition, and that includes restored copies. There just aren't any. And so therefore, in high grade, this comic can be bought for under $500. Quite affordable for an 80-year-old rare comic book. Looking at generally the most valuable comics of the month do come from DC. This is usually the case month by month. Action Comics number 8 is by far in the lead, but it's followed up by Detective Comics number 23. This features the Crimson Avenger in an early appearance, another early DC superhero. $900 in low grade and $9,000 in high grade. But only 9 copies have surfaced in that, but there are a record 3 copies in high grade on the census for CGC, and that is the most common book of any out this month. You'll see that high grade is truly scarce. So whether the price tag is high or not, the books just simply are not out there. And I've said before that if we just take a general guesstimate that maybe there's an average of 200,000 copies printed of each comic each month. With 23 titles this month, that means there were 4.6 million comics printed, and yet for the first time there is less than 100 copies in total of all comics listed, graded by the CGC, and that's all conditions, and that even includes restored and qualified copies. And it's even scarcer yet when you look at the high-grade copies. Out of the 4.6 million books, only 14 of them are high-grade and graded by CGC Census. In fact, a few of these books are so scarce that 4 of them have 0 copies graded by CGC. 3 of them is due to the lower price and print price in the Overstreet Guide. The 4th one being Jumbo Comics number 5, which, due to being oversized, cannot be graded by CGC, and that is why that book shows 0 copies graded. Funny Picture Stories Volume 3 number 1, however, has a CGC 9.8 copy graded. It is very rare and hard to believe that any books have survived in that perfect condition after 80 years. But it has happened this month with one particular book from Centaur Publications. If you wanted to buy a copy of each book on this list, you'll see that in low grade it would cost you almost $6,000 to buy a set. That is probably obtainable if you search for these books for a bit. But if you want to buy a high grade set, we're looking at $92,000. And I challenge you to even attempt this because you probably will never be able to do it. Half the books have never been graded high grade on the CGC census, and there's a good chance they simply do not exist. But definitely hunt eBay, hunt heritage auctions and all the big sites, and, be patient. You could find a high-grade gem if you just keep looking. They could just be out there. A couple copies may have survived over the years. So generally, we find that DC books on the list are the most valuable in low or high grade. There's a lot of copies on this list now that are in the $50 range, which is really affordable. If you want to collect truly historic, early 80-year-old comic books, featuring a lot of the early popular strips and some of the most important artists and writers of the day, $50 low grade for most of these books. And you could build a really interesting collection with a lot of these books. A couple other things I just want to mention quickly. Adventure Comics number 34 is the third issue of this new title. 7 copies graded, worth $300 in low grade. That's one of the most valuable books of the month. And More Fun Comics number 39 from DC is also one of the most valuable. Only 3 copies graded on the CGC census, even with a high price tag. And what's most interesting is out of the 3 copies graded, 2 of them are high grade. So that's quite a fluke, which means there's only 1 lower grade copy on the entire census. And it's well known that DC comics from the 1930s just generally are not very common. And if you use the Gerber photojournal guide for rarity, you'll notice that most of these books get a Gerber rating of 7, 8, or 9. And so truly fun, rare books to collect, and a lot of historical importance in this list. So lots of cool books this month. We'd like to thank you for watching this video, and of course keep checking back because I'm going to keep going month by month and teach the history of comics from a collectible and a rarity point of view.